Hope everybody is doing well on this particular Wednesday afternoon. It's time for another online dinner party where we invite people in to talk about what they've got going on in their lives and share their stories and all along those kind of ways. And definitely let folks know how things are going here in Durham, North Carolina as well. So, yesterday, and today has been a very lovely day. If you step outside, it's like a cool breeze and it's definitely some lovely fall weather. So that is definitely something that I know people are enjoying as it's football season. And now we're heading into a World Series that'll start on Friday between the Toronto Blue Jays and the LA Dodgers and all in that kind of way. And I know there are some folks that are rooting for one of those teams or another. My team, the Milwaukee Brewers, got swept by the Dodgers. So I was not a big fan of that and was actually hoping for the underdog series. So I was kind of rooting for Seattle against Milwaukee and didn't get my wish in either one of those ways. It might be like my fantasy football team, which is 1-5 and not doing all that well either. But who knows? Maybe I'll get on a winning streak, as they said, because as one of the commissioners, or as the commissioner said, in that particular league, it would take a minor miracle for me to get into the playoffs, as my team is doing very bad and all along those lines. But hey, that's just the way the cookie crumbles, and I haven't done well for a number of years. As a matter of fact, some of the people are wondering why I even bother to be involved in fantasy football, since I seem to pick horrible teams every year and can't seem to figure out what players to put in either. So yeah, it's definitely not been a good couple of years in that space and all along those lines. But hey, that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. And there are other folks that are trying to have almost as bad luck as I'm having, because just down the road from me here in Durham, North Carolina, is a UNC football team that isn't doing that well either. So definitely they're not doing all that hot, even though I think Duke is doing all right. They might be playing 500 ball or something like that, but they're hanging in there, and there are others sports teams in this area that are doing okay as well. And of course, a lot of people are paying attention to stuff going on in the world and all in that space, whether it's things going on in the Middle East or things going on in Ukraine and a number of other places as well. So I'm going to bring in my guest and see what she's got going on in her world. Maybe it's cool where she's at and everything like that. So we're going to see how Phyllis Levitt is doing and have a conversation with her as she's got things going on about America Therapy and all in that kind of way. So you're the author of America in Therapy, and sometimes it feels like we need therapy with all the trials and tribulations that are going on. I know that I went briefly in between because I did a split shift at the cultural center that I work at and all along those lines. But in that gap period in the split shift, I went down to the No Kings March and saw a lot of people that were definitely upset at what's going on in America at this particular time and all along those lines and all in that way. So tell me a little bit about yourself and about America in Therapy, and definitely I'm sure we'll have a rich conversation and all along those lines. And how is the weather where you are?
It's absolutely beautiful. I'm in New Mexico right now, and it's like between 60 and 70 and sunny and breezy. And so couldn't be better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed.
Yeah, it's really nice. And winter will come at some point, but I don't know when.
And I'm not
Yeah,
rushing it. I don't know about you, but I'm not rushing winter to come.
we're not either. We're not either. Although, climate change could be a factor in how long it's taken for us to have a frost, but we're still enjoying it here. Yeah, I've been a psychotherapist for my whole career and over 30 years, and I did a lot of therapy myself when I was younger from some childhood trauma that had really seriously impacted my life. And it was actually in doing that work myself that made me decide to become a psychotherapist. And I've worked with hundreds of people, couples, children, families, individual adults, teenagers. And what I've seen over the years is that many people are really hurting more than we would know. That a lot of people don't talk about what happened in their childhood or what happened in their community that really was really seriously hurtful to them or even dangerous. And there's a lot of violence, whether it's emotional, physical, mental, sexual, in our country today and maybe around the world as well. And I think most people do their best to survive it. I know that I did that myself, and that there really is help available. And basically, the big conclusion that I came to after being a therapist for several years was that our family systems are really critical to our mental health. When people grow up in safe homes, when they feel loved, when they feel like they have a voice, even if they don't get what they want all the time, but they have a place, that they're valued, that they're supported to be their best selves, and that there's some healthy limits and boundaries as well in the family, so that one person's needs and wants don't dominate everyone else, but that everyone has a place at the table and is valued for who they are, even if they're different. And many times, even in a family of origin, one child is very athletic, one child is more introverted, one child wants to be a hairdresser, one wants to be an astronaut. And we come into this world, I think, with certain natures, and we also are very subject to the way we're nurtured. And when people are in a relatively healthy family, knowing that no family is perfect, I don't think, but even where people make mistakes and maybe they yell at each other, but they come back to the table and they apologize and they try to make it right. These are the things that really support people to go out into the world as adults in a healthy way, in a way that they're willing to cooperate with other people, where they don't want to do harm if they don't get their way, that they're willing to sit down when there's a disagreement and try to work things out. And so these dynamics that we see in like what I say is an imperfect family, but a good family, we don't really see happening more and more on the larger levels of our society. And in many ways, some of the ways that we treat each other on a collective level, whether it's in a community or a state or a nation or globally, mirror some of the worst dynamics that we see in dysfunctional and abusive families. And from my experience as a therapist of so many years, I'm very familiar with what those dynamics are because I see them firsthand, and I'm very familiar with what the outcomes are for people if they don't get a chance to be safe, if they don't get a chance to heal, if they don't get believed, if they really try to tell what's going on that's not okay. And I think more and more people are being targeted today with no chance of being rescued, no chance of being heard. In fact, many voices are now being silenced and punished for speaking truth. So I really wanted to bring those family dynamics to the family of America, not as blame and shame of anyone, but as here's what the world of psychology has to help us heal from so much divisiveness, from so much escalating violence, from exploitation, from discrimination and injustice, because so many of those things are actually really known in the family system settings and even in individual therapy that aren't being shared on a national level.
Yeah,
So
why do
that's
you think so
why I
many?
wrote America in Therapy. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Like, no, good. That's a problem. That's actually a good way to get us started and everything. Why do you think that so many people are afraid of therapy and all along those lines? Because I do know that sometimes people are apprehensive about dealing with therapy, whether it's the type of therapy that you do or whether it's going to a regular psychiatrist or all along those lines. So why do you think that people have those kinds of fears?
I think it's a really good question because even though I think therapy is a little bit more acceptable today
Mhm.
in mainstream language, I think there are a lot of people that are afraid to go to therapy or dismiss it. And I think there's several factors, and you may add some that I forget, but some of the big factors are that I think we still live in a culture that expects us to buck up and
Yeah.
just get on with it, and you still hear people say, well, that was the past, move on, get over it. And my experience, both personally from what I went through as a child and working with hundreds of people over the years, is we don't just get up and go on and get over it. That the lasting impact of being harmed as a child and as an adult, of course, is very significant. And there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of negative beliefs that people take on about themselves. We often devise coping mechanisms just to survive that actually don't serve us or other people in our adulthood. So one thing is that we still live in a culture that really says, get over it. And, if you're a strong person, if you're worthy, you can just deal with this yourself. And so there's an inhibition about being vulnerable. And, many people who have been abused, and you've probably heard this story, and I've heard it I can't tell you how many times in my office, who have been abused have been punished worse for crying, for telling anyone, for showing any symptoms of what's hurting them. And so I think for many people today, opening up the pain that they actually are suffering inside feels dangerous. It doesn't feel safe. They don't really know if they can trust a therapist to actually be there for them and not judge them or blame them or shame them. So that's another thing. And so what I was going to say is how many people have said to me over the years, you know, if I start crying, I'll never stop.
Right.
And there's this fear that if you open the floodgates, you'll just be lost in the original pain of what happened. And what I want to say to people is I've never seen that be the case.
Yeah.
I have never seen anyone who's had an opportunity in a safe space to open up and explore what hurt them not come out the other side. When you're with a safe person who doesn't judge you, who has some skill in handling, you know, what you have to say, you move through it. And in fact, those tears become a relief. They become a release. So those are some of the big factors.
No, definitely, those are some big factors. Another one that I was wondering your thoughts about, and we've actually talked about it here on this and at work on this show and other shows as well, is the notion of institutional fears as well. I guess that's the best way to describe it, because I do know that sometimes people are afraid to go get therapy or reach out to people that are going to be therapists in some way to them, because they're afraid that they may make a judgment. Because I have known some people that have stayed in abusive situations, and you mentioned that one of your books deals with your own past and all along those lines, because they are afraid to reach out to the church or to the school system, because those systems may encourage them to stay in bad situations because of the morals that are practiced and taught in certain philosophies and all along those lines. So, you know, you may have a minister that is telling the people to stay in the relationship and work it out and all along those lines, even though it is harmful and sometimes you do have to walk away and everything like that. So I just wondered, is that part of the problem, that sometimes our institutions are too busy giving bad advice and or not willing to deal with the issues at hand?
Absolutely. I think that's an important factor, and it goes along with you should buck up and be able to just deal with it yourself.
Right.
And don't make waves. Don't tell on people, especially family members because very often the hurt is coming from people in your own immediate family.
Right.
And it could be in a school, it could be in a business, but very often it starts in the home. And that is intergenerational abuse. It gets passed down from one generation to another when it's not interrupted often. So yes, I think that's a really good point. And I also think that people are afraid often to tell, because we still live not only in a society that is sort of buck up and take care of yourself, but also we tend to blame our victims.
Okay.
So when people say, I have been hurt, how many stories have you heard where someone has finally come forward and said they were molested, and then they were blamed for wearing a short skirt or going home with that guy or whatever they did? They weren't asking to be abused, but they end up getting blamed. And so people are afraid of being blamed for what they have to tell as their truth.
Yeah. And I know that even with mental health, a lot of times that impacts some of our bigger issues as well. I mean, I live near the Duke University campus, and not that far from the Duke University campus are some folks that are probably homeless, or if they're not homeless, they are definitely in homes that they don't necessarily feel comfortable in for whatever reasons and all along those lines, but they give the impression that they might be part of the homeless community and all along those lines. And I do know that a lot of times the homeless folks, whether it's homeless that have been veterans or homeless that became homeless for whatever other reasons may exist, are oftentimes dealing with a mental crisis and everything like that. And whether we're talking about it on a national level or a worldwide level, there is no doubt that we are having some serious housing problems that are leading more and more people to be in that homeless camp, which can also lead to some mental health crisis as well. So it sounds like part of your book is dealing with these systemic issues that are also part of the crisis.
Absolutely. And that's really why I wrote the book, because most people who are therapists or who have done therapy kind of know some of the things that I'm talking about, but I don't think the general public does. And I don't think that many people who are in positions of power in higher institutions or governing bodies actually understand the psychological implications of what they're doing or why they're doing it. Um, it's easy to look at a homeless person and say, get a job. But if that person has been molested for 10 years and their parents were drug addicts and they were thrown out of their house when they were 12, you know, life is really one big suffering for them. And the pain of that kind of alienation and abuse and neglect, and then being blamed for it by the society that, walks by you when you're on your cardboard box on the street, doesn't help at all. In fact, it's further injury. And so, I think anyone who's had any kind of serious experience of harm in their childhood, whether it's a one-time thing or an ongoing situation of abuse or neglect, can tell you that you don't just get over it, that you're really impacted. You may become very depressed. You may have anxiety attacks. You may be subject to addiction. You may make very poor choices in relationship because we tend to be attracted to what we know. And so we really have to look at people who are really down and out, whether it's economically or socially or for some other reason, and even criminally, and really ask ourselves, what got them there? Why do we have so many homeless people? Why are our prisons overflowing? And that's the whole point of good psychotherapy, is looking into the causes and not just treating symptoms or blaming symptoms. And I think that's what we really need to bring to our country and to the world.
How much of that can we do even as individuals and everything like that? Because I'll tell you right now, I think it started a few days ago, and right now we're in the middle, and many states have them. Matter of fact, I think just about every state has it. We're in the midst of our state fair season and all along those lines. And I'm sure that people, when they're going to those state fairs, may recognize people that are in a crisis or all along those lines. But a lot of times, because it's a public event, you don't want to speak out. And a lot of times people don't want to approach people because they're afraid of the consequences if they try to intervene, for lack of a better term, and everything like that.
Right.
Just to give a personal example, and all along those lines, I was talking to my mom yesterday and everything, and we were reflecting on a time when I was a youngster. I think I was probably around 15 or something like that, and my brother, who's 7 years younger, was 8, and everything like that, and along those lines. And I think he wanted to get on one of those popular rides that has stunts with it, and all in that way. And as my mom put it, and this wasn't so much an abusive situation, but he worked my grandmother, who has been passed away decades ago and everything like that, but worked her last nerve, because I was probably the calmer child, just like I'm the calmer one now and everything like that. But he was having, as she's put it, working her nerves, and she probably was ready to pull out her hair based on the fact that he wanted to get on this stunt ride and was just wanting this and that. It was being basically like a spoiled kid, but recognizing the difference between a spoiled kid and recognizing somebody that's going through a serious mental crisis is sometimes what people are not sure what they're seeing. So therefore, they may not want to intervene for those reasons as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you feel safe yourself and you want to help someone who looks like they're in need, great. There are times I don't always remember to do this, but there are times when I keep a bunch of $1 bills in my car so that when somebody's on a corner, I can hand them some cash. And that doesn't take much. It doesn't take much to be friendly. It doesn't take much to just say hi and look someone in the eye and recognize them. And because so many people feel really invisible in our society, they don't feel seen. They don't feel like kindness is coming their way. So on an individual level, to do what feels safe for you to do. It may be contributing money to a cause. You don't have to necessarily interact with people that you don't feel comfortable with. And if you do want to sit down and talk to someone who's homeless and give them something and try to help them, fabulous. But the bigger picture is, I think, and this is why I say America in therapy, because I call it the family of America.
Mhm.
because every group of people operates on some kind of family dynamic, either healthfully or not, or abusively or neglectfully. And in the family of America, I think we really have to look at, the housing crisis, the minimum wage crisis,
Mhm.
the job crisis, the discrimination crisis that we have. Why are so many people homeless? And how can we help them as a community? Can we vote for people who want to, help establish more affordable housing, affordable health care, good education, so that people have more opportunity and they don't end up in these situations? Can we fund with our tax dollars therapy, help people who have childhood abuse issues, help people who are addicted to recover so that they can become functional, caring, safe human beings in our society, just like we would want to do for a family member who was in trouble.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about you also don't know when that might what you did might come back full circle and everything like that. Because I know that there was a gentleman, I haven't seen him recently, but he was an older gentleman, so he may have passed on or he may have moved on with another family member, but he was definitely in that camp of people that were homeless and everything. And man, he would oftentimes go and maybe ask for or get food from some of the nearby restaurants and all along those lines and in that space. And I remember the one of the stories that I remember hearing before he disappeared, and like I said, he may still be around, he may not be in because I haven't heard what became of the gentleman, but he actually went to the restaurants that had helped him and bought them some food at a time that he came across some money that was a
Wow,
benefit to him and everything like that. So when he came across a windfall, he gave back to those that had helped him.
that's beautiful. And I think for anyone who's been fortunate enough to be okay in this society, it can just be, it can be actually free to give somebody a smile. It can
Yeah.
be free to let them have your seat on the bus. It can be free to say, hi, how are you? I hope you're having a great day. And we can give from our bounty to people that are less fortunate.
Yeah, no
Um,
doubt about that and everything like that. We can definitely give to people that are less fortunate, particularly if we come across a windfall, as apparently this gentleman did. Why do you
right.
think? Because there is definitely a conversation about it. I kind of mentioned No Kings earlier and everything like that, but there does seem like there is a growing divisiveness in the country, and there's definitely, whether it's with guns or knives or any other things, escalated violence. I mean, it seems like a lot of times people are reaching toward violence to solve the problems versus other solutions that are probably and not probably but are more beneficial. So why do you think that we're seeing this push toward a growing divisiveness
Right.
and escalating violence in our society?
And again, I think there's many things that converge on that question, but I spend a lot of time on that in my book about what is this about, because we see how violence perpetuates itself when we work with individual people. Um, for one thing is, if you're in a home where violence is the way people deal with each other, where conflict is dealt with either verbal violence, physical violence, sexual violence, or ostracizing somebody and kicking them out, or depriving them of what they need, or shaming and blaming, all of those things. If that's the way conflict is dealt with, that's what you learn. And we're very subject to the role models that we see around us. Very little children. There was a someone who came into my office and was talking about being in a doctor's office, and there was a little girl, maybe 5 years old, spanking her doll while she was
Mm.
waiting in the doctor's office and yelling at the doll, and that she was mirroring exactly what she had experienced at home. And so, without some kind of intervention, without other role models, we tend to repeat what we know. And there's many things to say about this, but there's two big things I'll use as illustrations here, because I think they're really affecting our country in a big way, and I think they're affecting people all over the world. But since I'm an American, I talk more about America because that's the country I'm familiar with. But the two big patterns that come out of unhealed harm done to people by other people are this. and I've seen this over and over again in my office with hundreds of people. And that is, the two things are, if you're really hurt by other people, especially like your parents or your siblings and nobody stops them, or other family members or people in the community, and you get no help, you tend to cope in one of two ways. And one of them is called learned helplessness. You learn to be helpless because you were so overpowered that resisting often brought more abuse. And so many people who are hurt freeze because they're just trying to get through the abuse until it's over. And that coping mechanism very often carries over into adulthood, and people become frozen in the face of any kind of harm, assault, whether it's just a mean boss or an unfriendly colleague, or someone who is they are attracted to a partner who does the same thing, and they can't protect their children and they can't protect themselves, because that learned helplessness kicks in and they actually become frozen with fear. And we often blame people like that. Why didn't you just step up? Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you run? Why didn't you get help? And on a psychological level, we understand that many people actually cannot. They're so frozen with fear that they become paralyzed inside. So that's one thing. People who have internalized the coping mechanism of learned helplessness tend to be attracted to people who will dominate them, because that's what they know. They were overpowered, and we just tend to do what we know. It doesn't make sense. You'd think if someone was really hurt, they wouldn't be attracted to someone who would hurt them. But psychologically, we understand that let's just say it's a child who's being beaten or yelled at all the time, or shamed and blamed, or all of the above. They're still trying to get the love of that parent. And so they take that impulse with them into their adulthood, and unconsciously they're looking for that parent to love them. And it's often another abusive individual who themselves hasn't gotten any kind of chance to heal. Yeah. So that's one outcome, which is learned helplessness. And the other one is called identification with the aggressor. Mm-hmm. So it's the opposite. It's the people who role model the aggression that they've been subject to, and they're so terrified of their own vulnerability, and they're so terrified of being victimized that they become the one who has to be dominant. And these two find each other. And I can't tell you how many people I've worked with who are either in relationships like that, where they're the passive one and the other one is dominating them, or they had parents like that, and they're suffering from the after effects of that. So if you look at our country, and we're talking about, massive unhealed abuse, and now we have more and more abuse happening in broad daylight to thousands and thousands of people who have no recourse, then you're talking about creating more and more people who are learning helplessness or identifying with the aggressor. And that's what we're seeing.
We're definitely seeing that, because I know that even in my own life and everything, and I've been perpetually single and all along those lines and everything, and I'm now in my 60s and everything, but I know that some of the relationships that I went into in my life, they were definitely women that had been in abusive situations, like you were saying, and they brought those abusive situations into the new relationship, which was namely me and everything like that. So there was a time period that I was dealing with women that had, and they even told me that had been in abusive situations and everything, but then they would flip the abuse to their new partner, which, like I said, in that case was me, and all along those lines. I'm not saying that I'm perfect, that nobody's perfect in society. We've all got our faults and everything along those lines, but I did recognize that later in life that was something that I was being attracted to for whatever reasons and everything like that. And I had to come to terms with what was going on in that system and stay away from those kind of situations.
Right. And I think what's difficult about it is that whether you learned helplessness or you've identified with the aggressor, both are symptoms of unhealed abuse. Right. And what we need to do is help people instead of blaming them. And we're in a very shame and blame culture still here in America, and I think around the world. We need to help people heal. Nobody wants to be abused. Nobody wants to be kicked out of their house or molested or beaten or discriminated against. We don't want that. But with that cycle being unhealed, we tend to just keep perpetuating that in our society. And many people who have identified with the aggressor will look for someone to target. And who do they look to target? They look for the people who are most vulnerable, who have the least power, who have the least voice, who have already been injured. And there's many studies that show, for instance, that someone who is a molester as an adult knows how to target a child who won't resist. And they won't target a child who looks like they'll fight back. And again, not because they're evil people, but because they're untreated themselves. And it's a very fine line. And I think we really need to learn this both as individuals and as a culture. It's a very fine line for how do you empathize with someone's unhealed trauma and hold them accountable for their behavior in the present.
Well, there was an
And
article that came up recently here in North Carolina, where I'm based at and everything. And I'm just curious if, after I tell you about this article, if you tell me this is a national trend, because if so, it's scary, because they were saying that homicides tied to domestic violence are up in North Carolina. As a matter of fact, the article that I was reading said that a North Carolina Central University student, which is an HBCU, as a matter of fact, it's their homecoming right now, a Wake Forest mother of three, a retired doctor preparing to move his partner into his Durham home and everything. These are some of 18 people that were killed in domestic violence cases in the Triangle area just this year, the year that we're in. We were only in the month of October, so we still got 2 more months. And then they said an additional 9 people died by suicide after killing someone else in the act of domestic violence, according to an analysis by one of our local papers. So they're saying violence like this is on the rise in North Carolina, according to the North Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And they said last year was literally a record high. We've never seen that many homicides before, said Nisha Williams, who's the coalition's legal director. It seems like, and I think it was 94 homicides involving domestic violence last year. So it seems like there might be an increase here where I'm at in North Carolina, but is this a national trend, or is this something that we need to be concerned about, in part of even what your book is about?
Well, I don't know the figures for the national trend, but I'm not surprised to hear what you're saying. I'm sad to hear what you're saying, but I'm not fully surprised, because more and more people feel invisible in this society today. And the pain of not being valued, the pain of not having a voice, the pain of not being able to find a good job, or walking into some place and a security guard follows you around because you're Black or because you're whatever. The pain that people are suffering societally as well as in their homes disconnects them from their own sense of their own humanity. And some of them will end up as school shooters or shooting the people in their homes out of their own rage and pain and unhealed sense of not belonging. We are wired for love and connection. We come into the world this way. And many, many people are not getting that in their homes or in their immediate environment. And the damage that happens to them psychologically really cannot be described unless you've gone through some of it yourself, but it is really terrible. And so as a family of America, that's really part of what I'm saying. As a family of America, we have to devote ourselves to each other, not to bombs, not to making billions of dollars, but to helping families survive better, giving people the help they need, identifying children at risk so they don't become school shooters, and giving them the help they need. When someone kills other people and then commits suicide, we're talking about severe mental impairment that is understandable if you look at their history. People are not born school shooters. They are not born someone who kills their children or beats up their wife. We learn these things, or we're so in so much pain that that's the way our pain and rage comes out. And again, not hold people responsible, but help them see that this is a mental health crisis. And I really believe that what's going on in our country, even though we're being fed that it's an ideological divide and it's partisan politics and it's all of that. This is a really severe mental health crisis because mentally healthy people try to work things out. Mentally healthy people don't want to kill other people, anyone, whether it's here, or in a foreign country. Mentally healthy people are willing to sit down at the table and actually look and see if they have a part in the problem and not just blame other people. And we are not seeing this role modeled in our country today.
We've not seen that for a while now, because I mean, I've heard people talk about on both sides of the divide and everything, this notion of basically divorcing their people, or people have definitely unfriended. That was what I was looking for. People because of having a difference of opinion. And I remember seeing that as far back as like here in North Carolina, the whole debate around bathroom bills and the rights of the LGBTQIA community and all along those lines. But I definitely saw even entire families that would split from each other based on one person
Right.
having one belief and another person having another belief, and them being what they felt were opposite. Now, in some cases, they have reconciled their differences, or at least agreed to disagree. But a lot of times, people are still in those divides that were created decades ago, and all in that space. So I just wanted your thoughts around that, because I mean, some people are
Mhm.
even afraid to tell folks what their stances are on certain things, or
Yeah.
for fear that it may create a divide if somebody finds out that, say, one person is for one candidate, somebody's for another candidate in local or statewide elections,
Right.
or all in that kind of space. So some people will just opt not to speak at all, or leave those topics alone. Because I've even been in
Right.
conversations with people like, I won't talk about politics or sports because I know that those are
Right.
kind of like tension points for a lot of people in their lives, that they are very
Right.
passionate about certain things in those kind of categories. And some people would even put religion in that category as well. So I do know some people
Right.
that would avoid certain topics because they don't want to even create the opportunity of being separated because of having different beliefs.
Absolutely. And I think part of that is related to what I was saying earlier about learned helplessness. Because when people have been overpowered and they don't really grow up, and it could be someone who's identified with the aggressor as well. When people grow up, without learning how to respect the differences that we have, without learning that there's actually gifts in diversity. Different people have different things to offer. They have different points of view. They might see something that I don't see. They might contribute something to the conversation that I could learn from. But when you have abuse dynamics at play on a large level, people are easily controlled. They either want to identify with the bully on the playground because they don't feel personal power in their own lives. And you see this on the playground. It's often children who don't feel a sense of self-confidence and self-worth who either become bullies or identify with the bully on the playground and then tease the most vulnerable kid on the playground. And we do that as adults. And so there's sort of become this mass mentality that it's okay to do that. It's okay to target people. It's okay to project your pain onto somebody else and blame them. And we're doing that en masse in America today. And it's a psychological issue of projecting our shadow onto the most vulnerable. And the more that it is advertised as something that we're entitled to do or that we should do, or those people are really inferior and they deserve it for some reason, the more many people who are not feeling strong and confident and valued in their own right are easily convinced to go along with that.
But I'm wondering how much of it, the problem also is created by the access to a lot of things that are able to uh, kind of validate our stances or our belief systems, and all along those lines. Because I'm thinking about the fact that we live in a very digital society. So
Right,
even in, because I saw that you had initially co-directed a sexual abuse treatment program, and I'm not
right,
saying that there are different factors in why people get involved in uh, abusing their partner, whether that's a same-sex partner or a heterosexual couple or whatever other kinds of couples that are out there, or even they're abusing their children, and all in that space. That there are different ways that people can uh, use these tools, because I mean, a lot of times people will say that pornography can add to some of the reasons that people are looking at some images and some imagery that might be abusive, and then they're going like, well, I can do that to my other half and it won't have any consequences, because it didn't seem to have any consequences when they were doing it on that particular video, whether that was on Instagram, TikTok, or one of the more graphic sites.
Well, I mean, it's a very big topic, what you're talking about, and a lot of people are talking about it. And what I would say is, yes, our technology has just skyrocketed since I was a child. You know, I mean, I'm 78. When I was TV was invented when I was a little girl. So I'm dating myself, but I'm telling you, things have changed massively since I grew up. And yes, we can see all kinds of things. And I think this is what I would say about technology and social media. Technology is an amazing tool. I mean, you can Google how to fix, a broken part in your car at the snap of your fingers, right? You can talk to people on the other side of the world. You can get medical advice. There's just so many amazing things that technology has created in terms of communication. And obviously, it has a terrible downside, which is a lot of things are proliferated that are very dangerous, that are very inhuman, that are cruel, that teach people how to be destructive or kill each other or, make bombs, all the things that, we know, or they show images of, like you said, of people harming each other or assaulting each other or abusing each other and laughing about it. So my point is this, and so my point is always about mental health, because that's really what I'm passionate about. When you're mentally healthy, you decide how to use that technology. You have to decide, you make a decision. I'm only going to use it for the good. I'm not going to watch, horror movies that are sadistic and where they show rape and torture and that's somehow entertainment. And I think as a culture, we're really at a tipping point where we really need to decide what is healthy for us as human beings and what is dangerous for us as human beings. Because for the first time in history that I know of, and maybe there were things that happened way before, recorded history, but for the first time in history, we could actually make ourselves go extinct by our own hand with the technologies that we have devised for weaponry, with the ways that we treat the earth and pollution and taking resources that are not renewable. And so I think we really have to become mentally healthy and decide how we're going to survive here. No one would go out in their garden and knowingly put poison into the plants that they're going to eat the fruit from. And yet we're doing that.
Yeah, we're doing that. We're doing it on a lot of different ways and everything, because I'm a big fan of communications. I think communications is vital in anything, whether it's relationships or whether it's business dynamics or a number of other things. But even in the relationship dynamic and all along those lines, and I don't have any conclusive proof because I've never done any studies, and I don't know that anybody's done any studies on this and everything. But to your point, I would argue that fantasy can be a very important part of the dynamic of a successful and good relationship and all along those lines. But I would also argue that one of the tools of fantasy is pornography. And I would think that probably a good 60 to 70% of pornography is involving things that are not healthy and are not good. Because I'm thinking that I don't have any statistics, but I would guess that there is a sizable portion of that is basically kiddie porn, for lack of a better term, and everything like that. And
that's why I say I think we have to decide. Yes, there's a place for fantasy and creativity. I mean, part of our imagination is what makes us such amazing beings. Human beings have imagination. They can conceive of going to the moon before they've devised the rocket that can take you there.
Right.
They've conceived of, this, you and me seeing each other on a computer screen
Right.
long before that technology was invented.
Right.
And that's exactly what I'm saying. I think we have to make some decisions about how we use the abilities that we have.
No, I agree with you on that and everything. How much do you think it is also important to have in society? And I've heard this even from other folks that are practicing mental health and everything, to have what many people would consider like that balance in life and everything. And by that, I mean that you are physically fit, you're mentally fit, you're emotionally fit, and also, I would argue, spiritually fit. And to me, and I noticed that you had that even in your bio, religion and
Right.
spirituality are not the same thing to me. So spirituality
Right.
is just this idea that there is definitely something that is greater than us that is out there, and that can be considered God. It can be considered Yahweh. It
Right.
can be given different names and everything, but it's not so much the uh, kind of like the institutional part of religion and everything
Right.
like that. Because in
Right.
my mind, and I've even talked about this on this show several times, I remember an old documentary by an old news anchor. I think it was Ted Koppel. It might have been Peter Jennings, when actually it was my dad that brought me and my younger brother to watch the documentary, because we were living in separate houses but near each other, like a street apart from each other. And that's what I remember about that documentary. It was the notion that most religions have the same common principles, which is, respect your parents, respect Mother Nature, and a couple of other common principles as well. But most religions also have extremes, and that's where we spend too much of our time, is in paying attention to the extremes, whether that's Muslim
Right.
extremes, Christianity extremes, Judaism extremes, or even Eastern religions have extremes as well and everything. But I just wonder your thoughts around this notion of having harmony and balance.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are striving for that. Many
Mhm.
people have a lot of stressors in their life, whether it's economic or raising their children or difficult relationships or difficult work situations. And I think finding that balance for many people is very, very difficult. I really do feel like trying to have some of that in your life is important, that it's not all work, or it's not all play, or it's not all, going to church, or, like a single pointed sort of obsessive kind of life. But many people are living lives like that, and they don't see role models of what balance looks like. But yes, I think part of our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being has to do with finding some kind of balance. So I think one of the things that's missing for a lot of people today is time in nature.
Mhm.
Nature is incredibly healing. Nature is, it's really what we depend on for our very lives.
Mhm.
And yet, in a highly technological society, many people have lost touch with where our resources actually come from, and how critically important the health of the earth is to our own health and well-being, and even sustainability. Um, so yes, I do really feel that, and I think that, again, for some people who have to work 3 jobs to make a living, they're not having that balance in their life, and they
Okay.
can't.
Yeah,
And we have to really look at that as a family. Are we creating a culture that's healthy for people?
yeah, and yes, like you said, we're probably not doing that. Ironically, it was a technology app that has actually gotten me to more in tune with part of nature. I've always been a fan of nature, love watching, hearing the trees, and
Yeah,
the wind rustling, like on a day like today, everything, or seeing the leaves falling, and even watching
yeah,
the butterflies back in spring. But it was a friend of mine, and it was actually a former coworker, but still a good friend, that turned me on to the app Merlin. And I've actually used Merlin just to find out what other birds were out there and
right.
everything. Because that's what Merlin is. It's an app that allows you to identify the birds that you are hearing. And sometimes
That's
if I'm
lovely.
at a bus
Yeah,
stop or something like that, it's fun just to turn on that app and then realize that there are birds that I didn't even realize were here in my neighborhood, that have flown
right.
into the neighborhood, that you're sitting there going like, I didn't know that like, well, I knew hawks and wrens were here, but there was other ones that I
Mhm.
was going like, wait a minute. Like, I think one time I heard an owl in the nighttime. I'm going like, I didn't know owls were in the city, this deep in the
Right,
city and everything like that. So it was a
right.
fun way to connect to Mother Nature using technology. Because, like I said, Merlin is an app that was developed by a university. I believe it was Cornell, if I remember correctly, and everything like that. But it helps you hear and learn of these different birds that exist and everything like that. I did have a question about
Absolutely.
your education because, and this may surprise you, but my parents had a radio station, and the radio station was up in rural North Carolina and everything like that. But I think one of the principal people, it might have been Jerry Ann King, who was a master quilter and everything like that, also went to Antioch. And whenever I think of
Oh,
Antioch,
right.
I think of this great independent university that had some great history and all along those lines. And it looks like that's where you got your master's degree way back in '89, which wasn't that far back and everything. But I was just wondering,
Right.
what was it like attending this university that has some both fame and notoriety? Because I do remember hearing great things about Antioch, even in
Well,
connection to the '60s. So,
I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico at the time, and that I went back to graduate school. And I had, at the time, and I don't know if Antioch still does this, but they had an off-campus program, and there was someone in Santa Fe who was running their off-campus graduate program for people living in Santa Fe. So I did the whole program off campus,
oh well.
and it was fabulous. We got to design a lot of what we wanted ourselves, design our own courses. The
Mhm.
person who was running that program brought in a lot of licensed therapists to teach different courses. There was a family institute in Albuquerque that I did classes in family therapy. So yeah, I thought the program was wonderful.
It sounds like it was wonderful. Like I said, I think that family friend that went there also thought that it was wonderful, and they definitely brag about it as being part of their institution. Coming back to the other book, I definitely want to come back to to the current book. But can you just share a little bit about your previous two books? It sounds like they were about your own personal experience, which may have led to this bigger book and the wider period. So could you
Yeah.
just talk a little bit about A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire?
Yeah, and let me just say, to go back to something that you were mentioning earlier, because I think it's really related, when you were talking about the difference between religion and spirituality.
Great.
Um, so I grew up in a Jewish household. I never was particularly didn't feel a great affinity for the religion. I think I wasn't a religion person. And so I was a child of the 60s when a lot of spiritual influences came into the United States. There were gurus coming from India and many different places. And I ended up being part of several spiritual groups. And that was very wonderful for me, because as a child, even though I had, some darkness in my childhood that definitely deeply affected me, I also had some moments of just amazing connection to Mother Earth, and some profound moments of that I could really only describe as divine love just descending on me and filling me. So I knew there was something else, even though I didn't know how to get there. I knew there was something else. And so when the 60s came along, I was in New York City in an undergraduate program, and I ended up seeing a number of different spiritual teachers, trying to learn meditation and different practices. And what happened for me, and they were good. They were all very good. They're all based in, not in dogma, but in really connecting to the spirit within yourself, your own loving essence and wisdom within yourself. But I wasn't really able to do it. And I found myself at kind of a crossroads when my children were very, very little. And I decided to go to therapy, because I really got it that there was something in me that actually needed to be healed. And I wasn't able to do that with meditation. Maybe some people are, but I wasn't able to do that. So I went to therapy, and I started to remember some of the traumatic things that had happened to me as a child. And I slowly made my way through some of the worst part of that darkness. And it was very, very helpful. And it's actually the reason why I became a therapist, because I wanted to be able to give back to other people what had helped me. But in the process of that, I was keeping a journal. And one day when I was writing in my journal, I actually began to hear messages from that beautiful, divine, loving source. and I started writing them down. And they provided me with a whole other view on what was happening in my life, which was basically what our souls are doing here in these human experiences and in some of the difficult experiences, some of the painful experiences. We're not suffering because we're bad people. We're suffering in the big picture because we're living in a consciousness that is run by these opposites: love and hate, war and peace, have and have not, spiritual and mundane. And we're just bouncing back and forth between these opposites. And anyway, I won't go into the whole thing, but I began to get all these wonderful messages about what my personal soul was doing in the experiences of Phyllis. And so the first two books I wrote were really about that, about what happened in my childhood, how I made it through my adulthood or my early adulthood, what therapy gave me, and then what I began to receive in terms of more spiritual guidance from within myself, not dependent on a guru or a teacher or a religion or a dogma or any really enforced practice. And so that's what my first two books are about. And I'd actually like to continue that journey with another book that I have in mind. And I think that, we've, as a culture also, we've made spirituality and psychology very separate, and they're not. They're really not. What happened for me was, out of the spiritual work I was trying to do, I knew I had to heal on an emotional, psychological level. And as that healing process continued, I made more connection to spirit within myself. And I've seen that happen for clients that I've worked with. Even people who had no interest in a spiritual life or no connection to it, finding themselves, once they could do some healing on the traumas of their life, really open up to a greater source of love and wisdom and want to share that with other people.
There's another term that you use even in some of your descriptions, because in Matchmaker, which is the source that I found you at and everything along those lines, you can give hashtags and points of reference. And we've touched on a lot of them, like the life experience and the politics. But there's one that you have that's on there, and I think I have an idea why you have it on there and everything like that. But it plays into the mental health of the world and everything like that. Because a lot of people, I would argue that some people would say that because of my his work that I do in the history compartment at the Cultural Arts Center that I work at, and some of the event planning that I do in my being a connector. As a matter of fact, I was on a planning meeting for an event on Monday, and we were actually talking about me being a connector and all along those lines. And that's that notion of being an influencer, which also can sometimes play into the notion of ego and everything like that. So I'm wondering if part of the problem with the nation in the crisis is that everybody is kind of like the greed thing that movie Wall Street made very popular. But now in this day, everybody wants to be an influencer of one sort or another, which is kind of playing into our egos, which is a mental health thing as well. So I just wanted your take on that, because I can't tell you how many times people have their Instagram accounts, and there's numbers of both women and men that have OnlyFans accounts, and sometimes it's just them having a chance to stroke their own ego and everything like that. So how much is that part of the nation in crisis, is that we've become so ego driven? I would argue, no matter whether you like him or don't like him, that's part of the problem with the current person in the White House, because that's my
I think it comes from really that we are not loved and wanted for who we are.
Right.
How many kids grow up, and I remember this, in one elementary school where in the art class, we weren't allowed to draw our own pictures. We had to imitate what the teacher put on the board, so our creativity, our sense of ourselves and being worthwhile for who we are and what we have to offer is not necessarily a national priority at all, let alone in many homes or schools or businesses or communities. And so I think there are a lot of people who really don't feel worthwhile.
Right.
And they're craving this outer attention to prove somehow to the world that they matter, when actually they already matter. Every human being matters. And we need to give that message to each other. Um, and I think we don't. And I think some people do. And I think that there are some incredible teachers out there who actually do give that message to their students. I think there's some incredible parents out there who are giving that message to their children. But as a society, we're still extremely critical and judgmental of people, and we throw people away. We really are a throwaway culture. And so people are clamoring for attention, and they don't know how to do it other than to have 10,000 likes rather than actually having significantly intimate, safe, rewarding individual relationships with other people. And it's sad because it's a mental health issue, and it calls for not like what's wrong with you because you're such an egotist, but what's that empty place inside of you that really needs to be filled, and how did it get so empty, and what can we do to help each other?
But isn't part of the problem, Phyllis, is that we have, and you kind of alluded to it, but during the pandemic and during the height of the pandemic, I mean, there's still COVID out there now, so we can't really say that the pandemic is 100% done and everything like that, because I've even had friends that have had it recently and all along those lines, but it is
Right.
definitely waning, and it's more controlled than it was at the height and everything like that. And that being said, I remember I participated in a clubhouse room, and in the clubhouse room, it was like a audio theater group. I was trying to describe how I would describe what IPC was doing, because he's on Instagram and he used to work with George Lucas, but it was an audio theater group, and it was all of us, some that were professional actors, some that were not professional actors, and we were playing these different characters. And when we were playing these characters, which were made up characters, I mean, they were definitely from the land of Matsu and everything like that, then we had to get out of our heads and everything like that. So we had to learn how to be creative again and to get out of our heads, because unfortunately creativity is sometimes driven out of us in the corporate America and everything along those lines. So that was one of the things that IPC would do, even when we did some of our like practices before the actual rehearsals and everything like that. So some of the warm-up exercises, that's the word I was looking for, and everything. But it was ways for us to get out of our head, whether that was playing certain types of games that improv people will know, and all along those lines. But I just wondered, is that part of the problem that we have in this mental health crisis, is that we have squashed a lot of things that are important to us, such as the creativity and even the sense of learning. Just as an example, I remember I have two nephews. I don't have any kids of my own, but I have two nephews, and one is a high school senior and one is a high school junior. But I remember when they were first born some 16, 17 years ago and everything, that my dad would go around and show them the wonders of nature. You're talking about nature. So he would show them leaves, he would show them trees, and he would definitely get their curiosity going at a very young age. And I know some philosophies of education say that there are people don't know enough at that age to even understand what they're being told. I disagree, because I think that stuff is resonating even when you're in your mother's womb and everything like that. I think there have been lessons about music being impacting people when folks are in their mother's womb. But I do know there is some philosophy of education that says that people don't really grasp things until they get to a certain age of the brain development and all along those lines. But I just wonder, do you think that this squashing of creativity and the squashing of curiosity is part of the problem?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's one of the big dangers of technology, because so many children are on devices really, really young, and it's addictive. And again, I'm not an expert in AI by any means. I think AI can be incredibly helpful, but it can also be a substitute for thinking. You plug a question into AI, and AI is so smart and is so well spoken, and it comes out with this whole. I've only tried it a little tiny bit just to see what it would come up with, but I was impressed. But I'm an adult. I've already gone through years of schooling where I had to think, and I had to come up with my own reasoning and my own thoughts and impressions about books that I read, or things that were being taught about history or whatever it is. So I had to exercise that part of my brain. And I'm fearful for the younger generation, if they don't have to exercise that part of their brain, what will happen to it? What will happen to our innate creativity? What will happen to our innate imagination and fantasizing about what's possible? And will it just become some futuristic technological whatever age where our own humanity is no longer important to our survival? Because I think that's the end of the human race myself. And I don't mean to be a doom and gloom person, because I love people. I love this earth, and I don't want to see that happen. And that's part of the reason why I'm talking.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know people are concerned even about the nature of what's going on with technology, because I know a lot of people, you talked about it earlier, with even the way that society is going with jobs and everything. And there are a number of people that are concerned that as more and more things are being done technologically, that less and less
Right.
jobs will be done with humans and everything like that. Because I've even
Right.
heard of some restaurants that are starting to use robot servers and using
Oh
robots
my
and other
God. Oh
capabilities
my
that
God.
people had regular jobs in the past.
I think that's tragic. Honestly, I think it's tragic. When I was writing my book, I did a certain amount of research for some of the things that I was talking about. And I mentioned this earlier, but there's actually scientific research that says we are wired at birth for love and connection. And it is the best food for human beings. And what I have found as a psychotherapist and doing my own work and, knowing millions of people, but working with hundreds of people, is that every injury, no matter what your symptoms are, no matter what your story is, and everybody's is different, every injury and every poor coping mechanism, and sometimes terrible coping mechanisms, can be traced back to an injury to love and safe belonging. When people are loved and they're safe and they feel that they're wanted, they will thrive. And
Yeah.
that's the cure. And if we don't provide that for other people, and AI is not going to provide it for you, and technology is not going to provide it for you, it has to come from other human beings, nature, animals, the whole gamut.
Yeah, I agree. And you got to have that society of where people are working together. Because one of the things that I remember, even as a kid, was definitely that playground. With that outside playground was part of the development of the true connection to people, and all along those lines, whether it was going out and playing on the swings or running with your friends when you were in grade school, or all along those lines. And it even taught you some things about how society can even do placements and all along those lines. Because one of the things, and we're in the middle of baseball season, and it's a memory that strikes with me and everything, and it's probably less now because people have gotten better and everything. But when I was growing up in rural North Carolina and all along those lines, and I tell this story sometimes just as a humorous story and everything, I knew that I did not want to be an outfielder because there weren't people when I was growing up that could actually hit to the outfield. So you were spending a lot of time being very bored out there and everything like that, because most of the hits were in the infield. So if you got placed in the outfield, you got a lot of time to look at the grass, look at the trees, and look at everything else, because you were probably going to miss the opportunity whenever something got hit out there, because you were so shocked that the person could actually manage to hit it out there. And everything. So it's like, wait a minute, that just went over my head, because nobody had hit out there for like an hour and a half.
Right.
So you do have to learn these kind of social development tricks and everything along those lines as you grow up and everything like that. And you see even kind of where people put you in their system and everything. But then you can also buck the system, because one of the things that I've told on this story, on this show several times, is that, and that's even come back to the connection story. Phyllis, I was the world's worst track athlete. I was like Charlie Brown. If you remember the old Charlie Brown series and everything like that. So I think the one time that I came close to winning or even near winning, I was so used to losing that even if I came in 7th or 8th place, all of my classmates probably would tell you I finished dead last, because I finished dead last for years. But I did two things that kind of play to what we're talking about, which is this notion of understanding ourselves. One is I realized that I wasn't a good runner, but I was a good recruiter. So I went to the track athletes that were friends of mine. I mean, the track athletes, the basketball players that were friends of mine, the football players that were friends of mine, and other players, and made sure that they were going to run on the track team with me. And 3 of the 4 years we actually won. So I was probably a great recruiter even at
Wow.
that time, which is something that I'm still good at this day. I also realized, to your other point about the ego and everything, that I didn't like losing. So in my senior year, I had a friend who is now, he passed away decades ago and everything like that, but he was bigger than me. So I knew I could beat him. So I recruited somebody that I could beat. And that was the one year that we lost because we didn't have anybody that could do, I think it was the pole vault and everything like that. I think we had somebody that could run and stick in there, but they couldn't get over. So we lost by like 3 or 4 points because I recruited a friend that I could beat, and we didn't have anybody that could do the pole vault.
Right. Well, what's your takeaway from all that?
Well, a couple of takeaways. One takeaway was that I realized one of my skill sets, which is that I'm a master networker. I've been master networking on a number
Mm,
of things in the last several years. And two, the other takeaway was that um, you have to look at the kind of like what you're talking about with your book. You have to look at the bigger picture and not your
right.
individual picture. I was looking at the individual picture where I was getting frustrated at the fact that I was constantly losing. So then when I
Mhm.
recruited that friend that I was able to beat, that could have cost us. I mean, it wasn't probably the only factor, but it was one of several factors that probably helped in that defeat. But yes, yeah, I needed to look at and that's probably what you're saying in the book, that we need to look at the bigger picture versus just our individual picture.
Right. And I like what you're saying, because one of the things that it makes me think of is we all have something to offer. Everybody has something to offer. It doesn't have to be on a national or global scale. You don't have to become famous. You don't have to have 10,000 likes on YouTube. You really don't. Everybody has something to offer. And I think we live in such a competitive society that often people don't recognize or value their own offering, their own skill set, their own gift, because they think it should look some other way. And beautiful for you that you came to understand where your power lay,
Right.
and you could develop that. And that's something you can teach children. That's something
Right.
you can encourage in children. Um, so yeah, I think that's just a really important point. And I think when people say, well, how do you know what that is? And I always say the surest way to know what that is what do you love?
Yeah.
What do you love to do? Where do you love to be? How do you love to be? That's probably an indicator of where your talent and your gifts lie.
Yeah, there was a
Um,
book that was actually literally what you're saying, and it was an old-fashioned book. I think it was written in the 70s or something like that. It was called "What Color Is Your Parachute?" And that's really what they
mhm,
were trying to get people to do, is
right,
find what their passion
right,
was and to go into that for their career. Because it was like a career assessment book that a number of guidance
right.
counselors would give you back in the day. But I do remember that book, and it was basically trying to get people to understand what their talent was. One of the other things we talk about on this show, and we'll probably wrap up in about another 10 or 15 minutes and everything, is this notion of, on this show, we talk a lot about the imposter syndrome. So I was just wondering, how did you cope with that? Because you seem very uh, confident in what you've done with your books and even in what you did with your psychology. But whether you have a significant other or whether it was your own parents or everything like that, did you ever have to deal with the imposter syndrome? And if so, how did you get past it and everything like that? Because that imposter
Yeah,
syndrome is that notion that um, fear of going after things because of fear of failure and everything. I know that I have passed
right,
jobs and everything
right.
because of that fear of failure. And I mentioned I'm in my 60s and still single, so I've been passed on relationships because of fear of failure and everything like that. So how did you deal personally with your
Yeah,
imposter syndrome?
I think it's common. I don't know if I would call it exactly imposter syndrome, but it's probably the same thing. It's just insecurity about yourself.
Right.
Am I good enough? Am I good enough? And again, I think that one thing that really helped me, I'll share this, is there's a saying in the world of therapy, and it's probably, it goes beyond therapy. It can go to any profession, but it's especially when your profession is something where you have something, a skill or a service to offer other people. And the saying is, we teach what we came to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And that saying really helped me because when I went to graduate school, I was still in therapy myself. When I started my practice, at first I worked in an agency, and that gave me some really good experience. I had really good mentors and people who I did consultation with, so I wasn't just striking out there on my own. But by the time I started a private practice and was seeing clients on my own, I kept um, one person who was like my supervisor. So I always had some place to go and learn from what I was sharing about what I was doing. But I held that, I came to learn as well as to share whatever knowledge or skills I might have. And I think it builds in a little bit of humility, because you're not like the best therapist in the world, but you have something to offer. You've been through the ringer yourself, and you know what it's like to be down in the bottom of an abyss and feel, like pain and darkness and not know if you're ever going to get out. And you can share that. And so, yeah, I think it's holding that balance between I may have something to offer, but I also have something to learn. And I've learned from my clients, not just from graduate school. Graduate school just gives you the degree to get going.
Right.
But you're constantly in a learning process I think in any healing profession. And some of my greatest teachers were some of my most incredible clients where, and I would always say, they'd say, will you help me do this? And you did this and you did this. And I say, we did it together.
Yeah.
I
I
didn't
think we all
know
learn
you.
together. I think that's, I think that you learn from the time, as I was alluding, from the time you were born, even in your mother's womb, to the time that you pass away and everything like that. And I'm sure that there's probably some lessons that are even learned on the, if you're a religious person, on the transition to the next plane and everything like that. But I think
Right?
that we are constantly learning no matter what and everything. I was just curious because you kind of alluded to it. And I know that my dad's other half is Lady Love and everything, who, by the way, is a Jewish lady from New York, and they've been together longer than Dad was with Mom and everything like that. But I know Mom talks about being a deadbeat Delta, which is a social a sorority, and by that she means she's not active. And I know that to some degree, Linda, who's Dad's other half, doesn't really think of herself as being all that active in Judaism because she's a Jewish lady as well and everything. But how much in society does that play into this notion of acceptance? Because I do know that sometimes people will ostracize people that they feel aren't as active as they should be. Because, like I mentioned, this is homecoming week, so I'm sure some people will be ostracizing some of the people that were involved in the Delta Society when they were in college, but Darn is involved now and everything like that. And people have different reasons for dropping out of organizations. Maybe they don't get the benefits that they thought they were going to get and everything like that. But ostracism does seem to be a part of this mental health situation that we're in. Well,
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that either of the ladies that I just mentioned have been ostracized either from
Right.
the Jewish Society or from their sorority, because I know they both have friends in both of those situations. But I'm just using that as a framework to bring up the
Yeah.
discussion of
I,
ostracism.
I agree with you. I think it's a really big issue. I think, and again, I think it comes out of a certain amount of brainwashing and poor role modeling and not feeling good about yourself so that you can't convey that good feeling to other people about themselves.
Right.
But I think we live in a society also that's very much like you have to do it like I do or you're wrong. And that's just simply not the case. We all have something to offer that's different. And I think a healthy family and a healthy society actually celebrates our diversity and sees that, like maybe your religion gives you this and mine gives me that, or maybe your scientific bent helps me, heal my heart, and my psychological bent helps you heal your emotional heart, So I think that's one of the tragedies of the world we're living in today is this demand for absolute conformity. And it actually goes against all of human nature. We are not wired to conform, with one religion, one view of men and women, one view of we're just not wired that way. And we actually really all have something very different to contribute. So I think I
We're not
definitely
wired that way, Phyllis. But the other thing that runs into a problem, and I've seen it even when watching the news after a significant event happens and everything along those lines, is that I don't think that we're wired enough to pay attention to not just our own mental health, but the mental health around us and everything like that. Because even this famous chess player, Daniel Naroditsky, and everything, and one of our founders, actually a couple of our founders, and some of our other people are in the chess world, and all along those lines. We even have a chess show and everything like that. But he was talking about this gentleman who apparently killed himself. Was a famous chess player and everything, but apparently he was talking and like ranting earlier is what I think I read earlier. So they were saying that he was doing some things along those lines. And of course, we all know the famous stories of the school shooters and the everything else like that. And then you find out, and this was a young man, by the way, this chess champion. I think he was like 29 years old and everything like that in that space. But we oftentimes hear people that are after an incident, we find out that people are like, one, they didn't think that they had that in them, whatever that atrocity was or everything. But then you also got the people that like point out the things that they noticed different about them during the time, but they were afraid to speak out about it.
Right. And I think that's, again, that's very sad. And, if someone kills themselves, they're hurting. Right. They're hurting. If they shoot other people and kill themselves, they're hurting. They may be angry, they may be hurting, they may be, may have no compassion for other people, but the bottom line of where that came from is deep pain and anger and feelings of, something, abuse, neglect, invisibility, whatever. Often, I read a lot of stories when I was writing my book about mass shootings and what the characteristics were of people who did that. And most of them were suicidal. Right. And very often you hear that at the end they kill themselves. And this is a mental health issue. It may be a gun issue, but at its heart, it's a mental health issue, because you can give me a gun and I could give you a gun and we're not going to shoot anybody. Right. Because we're not in that kind of distress. We're not in that kind of altered mental state. And so what's the difference? What really is the difference? I have to say this, between the school shooter and somebody who bombs a village and kills thousands and hundreds and thousands of innocent men, women, and children. What's the difference? And somehow we make it okay, and it's not.
It's not okay. And just to make some clarification, because I to make sure that I'm correct as well. When I'm reading this article, they were saying that this U.S. chess superstar, so like I said, he was 29, apparently looked disoriented and was rambling in this disturbing final video before his mysterious death. So I think they're still trying to investigate the death. So it might have been a suicide, it might have been something else, but they're still trying to figure out what it was going on. But they did say that he appeared drowsy, disoriented, and spoke in a confused and rambling manner. So whether that was drugs or whether that was a mental thing, we will find out as they continue to investigate.
Could be that too. Yeah. I mean, it's just a tragedy when someone no longer wants to live for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's definitely a tragedy and everything like that. And that's something we're seeing more and more people talking about, because I know people that are starting to check out, whether that's suicide or check out of society, because there are a lot of people that are kind of, to what your book talks about, they're frustrated by society. So there's a lot of people that are finding different ways to check out. And check out doesn't always mean checking out in terms of life. It can also mean checking out in terms of like moving to another place, because there's a number of people that have moved out of the country because they were frustrated by the U.S. And it can also mean like that whole checking out of society. There's a term for it and everything's not coming to me, but it's basically where they go off the grid. That was the word I was looking for, going off the grid and everything like that. And that doesn't mean that they're homeless. As a matter of fact, some of the people off the grid actually have significant means in order to truly go off the grid, because it costs a decent amount of money to go out into certain mountains that have water, and be able to bring the water into your environment. So like I said, it can be something that can be very subtle, or it can be something very drastic and everything like that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't begrudge anybody if they want to move away or move into the mountains or whatever, but I also do feel like we all really need to help each other here. We need each other.
Need to help each other here. We got to, and even if you're off in the mountains, I think you still got to find ways to have at least some connection to society, because I don't think that you can ever be totally off the grid, even if you want to be off the grid, because you're gonna
I don't think so either.
Items that you will need to survive, because you got to find some way to get food to yourself. So you got to find some way to get the things that we need in order to sustain life. So it's a sustainable ingredients
Right.
that we need in life. You've got to find ways to get them to you and everything like that. So like I
Right.
said, I don't know that there's a way to be truly 100% off the grid, even though I know some people that are looking into tiny homes and other ways of being
Mhm.
more affordable, because this is definitely, that's the other crisis we've got is an affordability crisis, because even here in Durham, we
Right.
just passed some
Right.
new ordinances to help people make sure that they can even afford a house or an apartment and everything like
Right.
that. So
Yeah.
that just came out. Well, this has been a fun conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm going to wrap up. But one of the things I get everybody to do when I wrap up in these hour and a half to an hour and 45-minute conversations is, if you want to tell folks other things that you haven't got to about the book and all along those lines, I love to have all my guests give a message of positivity and hope, because Pod TV is a global network and all along those lines. And if you want to tell folks how they can reach you, those are the three things that I need from you as we
Oh,
get ready to wrap up.
absolutely. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I just love to tell people, like, we can all make a difference. You matter. Even if you don't feel like you matter, and your kind word to one person or somebody's kind word to you can make a difference. If hate makes a difference, love makes a difference. If exclusion makes a difference, helping people belong makes an incredible difference. So don't ever doubt that you matter. And if you're really hurting, please find someone to talk to, a good friend, someone in your church, a therapist, a community organization that offers mental health services, a hotline. Reach out for help. There's nothing to be ashamed of if you're really in pain and you don't know what to do. And hopefully, just pick up the phone or tap on someone's shoulder or say, hey, can we talk? I really need something. And then be there for other people who look toward you for that, because really we can all help each other, and it doesn't cost us anything. It's just the goodness of our hearts. So thank you for asking me that. And then I would just say, please, check me out online. My book is available. American Therapy is available from all major booksellers, as well as my other two books, which are called A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire. Please avail yourselves, because I like nothing more than to share what's been valuable to me with other people. I have a website. It's my name, www.phyllislevitt.com, and you can see how it's spelled on your screen. I'm on all the social media. I post all the time. I try to post things that are really of value. If you go to my website, you can sign in and get my newsletters. I just, really just like to share. Not in this to make money. I'm just here to share. So that's what would be really great. I have some free offerings that are on my website. I have a kind of a little do-it-yourself course on conflict resolution and identifying your conflict type, because I really feel that learning how to peacefully resolve conflict is probably the difference between life and death for the human race right now. So that's it. If I've left something out, I can't think of what it is at the moment, but I'm on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and all those things. And I'm really happy to connect with anyone who wants to connect with me. You can also email me at my name, Phyllis@phyllislevitt.com. So, don't reach out if you want to. I'm happy to connect with you.
And your message of positivity for the global community?
Yeah, I really believe in human beings. I think there is hope. I think we still have time to turn this around. And if you don't know what your part is, like I said earlier, just follow your heart. Do what you love. If it's being kind to animals, if it's being a better parent, a better partner, or creating some global organization, it all counts.
Yeah, we definitely all counts and everything like that. Just really quickly, and I thought about this, I meant to ask you this earlier. For those that are curious, what is the difference between a psychotherapist and a regular therapist?
Oh, I think they're the same thing.
Okay,
A
that's what I thought.
psychotherapist is usually a master's degree in either psychology or social work. And then a PhD would be a psychologist or a psychiatrist.
Right.
And some psychologists and most psychiatrists are also focused on psychotropic medications. So,
Gotcha.
and that's not something that I do.
Gotcha. And just last question, and this will be the absolute last one, is
Okay.
before I play this spot and everything, I'm gonna play a commercial to get us on out of here, and it's one that I play regularly. It deals with education and teachers, but also those workers that are the ones that are the support staff, whether that's the guidance counselor or the janitor or the cafeteria worker, and all along those lines. So, before I play the commercial, any thoughts that you have about the importance of education and our support people in the education field?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I grew up in a family that was very dedicated to education, and I can't tell you how grateful I am for that. They really valued education. They helped us, learn and think. And so, one of the values of education is really learning to think, to consider different opinions, to look at different points of view, to look at the arc of history, what there is to learn from it, to develop your creativity, whether it's an art class or a music class or whatever. So education, yes. And if you're a support staff person, you're just as important as everybody else, because we need all of it. We need the teachers. We need the people in the cafeteria. We need the people who write the books. We need it all. And that's part of, the bigger picture, is that we all really matter here. And we forget that. Like, we really actually can't do it without each other.
Yep, that's very true. So I'm gonna play this commercial from the gentleman in Tulsa who's been doing this awards for a while, and everything is actually to support both the teachers and the teachers' support system as well. So I'll play that one and maybe one other one as well. But Ms. Levitt, it's been a great having this conversation with you, and hopefully we can get you back on some other shows as well. But I've thoroughly enjoyed having this time to spend with you and to learn more about the book and learn more about what you've got going on.
Well, thank you so very much, because it's just been wonderful talking with you. And I love all your great questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for coming to the 2020 TAF Awards. This was a show like no other, people. This is the Grammys for dignitaries, educators, and support staff around the state of Oklahoma and worldwide. We cannot do this without the support of the people. So we thank you. I thank you for being such a dedicated supporter to this movement for the Teachers Appreciation Foundation. I thank you.
Are you looking for money-saving strategies for your business and personal finances? Are you tired of working hard every day with little or nothing to show for it? Contact Prosperity Financial Services, LLC right now for your free financial consultation. Call now to reserve yours today, 804-349-8600, 804-349-8600.